They tore through the far field like it was worthless scrub, the excavators chewing up earth as if 4 generations of my family hadn't lived and died here. At the edge of the trench stood Victoria Langford, president of the Sapphire Ridge HOA, watching behind mirrored sunglasses. "Your ranch is just a speed bump," she said, brandishing a stack of permits. "Progress doesn't wait." Heat rose in my ears. This land, 200 acres in Cedar Glen Valley, wasn't just property. It was the heartbeat of my grandfather's gamble and my father's grit. I'd left a corporate law job to come home, to rebuild Harper Ranch with small batch cattle, sustainable crops, and a farm-to-table side business. And now an HOA wanted to thread a pipeline across my eastern pasture without so much as a real conversation. Their letter had arrived on county letterhead. The Sapphire Ridge HOA was exercising right-of-way to lay a water pipe. At the Redwood County office, a board clerk told me the permits were posted. Somewhere. Sometime. I drove to the Sapphire Ridge clubhouse, a slab of glass and chrome that looked like it had landed from another planet. When Victoria finally met me, she floated in late, all charm and certainty. I slid her a folder with 17 violations, bad notice, bad process, bad faith. She pushed a check across the table big enough to buy a new life. "Take the easement and save yourself the headache." I left it untouched. No local firm would take my case. Conflicts, they said. My friend Owen Reyes, halfway up a mountain in Peru working on indigenous water rights, promised to research when he could reach a signal. Neighbors? Half had already sold options to the HOA. Progress, they shrugged. On Monday the machines arrived with a sheriff's escort. When the bucket grazed the little fence around our pet cemetery, something snapped. That night, I dug through my late father's desk until moonlight turned to dawn. In a metal file I found it. A 1954 drought-era purchase. Comprehensive water rights for the entire northern watershed, plus a faded photo of Dad at a county hearing beside a much younger Victoria. The back read, "Testimony against V. Langford drilling application, Redwood County, 1987. I drove to see Agnes Whitaker, the town historian who knew everyone's grandparents and everyone's secrets. She spread a map open across her dining table. "Your grandfather didn't just buy access," she said, tapping the well site. "He built the main well and trunk line that later fed the lowlands. The county court recognized that origin in 1963. The master valve is here, on Harper Ranch." She peered at the photo. "And yes, that's Victoria. She tried to punch new wells back in the 80s. Your father stopped her. That evening, a text pinged, 'Not safe to talk on the phone. River Bridge, 9 p.m. Come alone.' There, shivering under sodium light, was Colin Mercer, a civil engineer for Sapphire Ridge. He handed me a USB drive, shallow pipe depth, suppressed contamination reports, doctored impact studies, and a suspicious consulting fee to Mayor Whitman just before approvals. "There's more," he said. "The HOA's entire water plan leans on the aquifer that originates under your land. They need your source." My sister Natalie Harper blew in from Chicago the next day like a storm front, turned my kitchen into a war room, and began shaping the narrative. "They're calling you a stubborn holdout," she said. "We flipped that. Stewardship versus exploitation." Owen finally reached stable internet and confirmed what the documents suggested. Our rights were ironclad and physical, tied to infrastructure my grandfather built. Buried in a rusted box behind Dad's gun cabinet, I found the rest. 1963 court validations, system maps, and a clause I had to read twice. In any case of misuse or public harm, the rights holder could immediately reclaim control. Not through a years-long fight. Immediately, we confronted Victoria in her office. She laughed at the antique paperwork and hinted our rights were dormant. Natalie smiled back. "That's not how riparian and prior appropriation work in this state." The smile left Victoria's eyes. Pressure came hard. A banker called about valuation concerns. Local buyers canceled produce orders. Anonymous accounts accused Harper Ranch of contaminating soil. Colin warned he'd been threatened with an old party photo if he kept talking. Still, he kept talking. When the Redwood County Water Board tried slow-rolling our filing for 6 to 8 months, Owen said what I needed to hear. "They're stalling because they know you're right." Then Agnes found a paper trail, direct payments from Victoria to multiple board members. Real names, Real dates. The plan took shape. We'd file the reclamation notice with the state, document the environmental abuses, and, when the timing hurt the most, close the valve legally. Natalie would coordinate press so the truth landed before Victoria's spin. Colin showed me the pump house in the far corner of our property, where a heavy iron wheel waited like an old sentinel. One turn, and Sapphire Ridge's pressure would fall. Their towers had about 12 hours of reserve. Friday afternoon, opening weekend at Sapphire Ridge. 98 degrees in the forecast. Fountains primed, pools shimmering, a desert oasis showcase underway. The state acknowledged receipt of our notice and confirmed physical reclamation was permitted under the clause pending review. Not an endorsement, permission. It was enough. At 3 p.m., I gripped the iron wheel and cranked. Rust groaned. The needle dipped. In minutes my phone lit up. What have you done? Victoria hissed over the noise of a faltering ceremony. Exercised a lawful reclamation due to documented misuse, I said. Enjoy the bottled water. By evening the decorative lakes stopped refilling, sprinkler arcs collapsed into dribbles, and the golf greens began to freckle brown. The footage of sun-hatted buyers staring at dry fountains went viral. At dawn, Victoria arrived with bolt cutters and private security to break into my pump house. Our cameras streamed everything. The sheriff had no choice but to intervene. Public attention flipped. A regional outlet ran Colin's on-camera account and the doctored reports. Agnes's corruption documents forced recusals and pulled the case up to the state level. A judge outside Redwood County granted an emergency order upholding our reclamation pending a full hearing. A preliminary finding recognized the historic ownership and conservation clause and warned that Sapphire Ridge's unlicensed system could face removal if they didn't secure legal access. Victoria swung wildly, pushing a smear packet about my supposed violations. Natalie swatted it down with inspection records. The Sapphire Ridge HOA board, suddenly without its queen, called me. We want to negotiate. At any cost. We met at the Cedar Glen Community Center, 5 board members, and a lawyer who looked like he'd sleep in his suit for a week. They claimed ignorance of Victoria's methods. Maybe they were. I laid out terms with Owen. Rebuild the pipeline to code at your expense. Establish a conservation buffer along our boundary. Institute usage caps with transparent monitoring. Compensate for damages. Publish a formal apology. In exchange, I'd license water use, access, not ownership, under strict conservation standards. Meanwhile, the fallout spread. Mayor Whitman resigned. The Redwood County Water Board faced investigation. Colin accepted a new job in environmental compliance, poetic justice, if I've ever seen it. A loud minority of homeowners accused me of holding them hostage until Agnes stood at a town meeting and said, "You bought houses in a dry place without checking who owned the water." The room went quiet. Then someone clapped. Negotiations took 3 weeks. Victoria tried one last gambit through her lawyer. Thinly veiled blackmail, demanding we reopen the valve. Unconditionally. We ignored it. The state's preliminary ruling leaned our way, and the HOA signed our agreement unanimously. The water would return, responsibly. We reopened the valve under a new protocol. Colin oversaw reconstruction, proper depth, lined trench, real gauges, and emergency shutoffs. The conservation strip went in with native grasses and signage explaining the watershed. The fountains now run on a schedule. The golf course switched to drought-tolerant blends. Pool covers go on at night. Not showy changes, sensible ones. 2 weeks after the ink dried, a real estate listing appeared for a mansion with potential water views. Word on the street was Victoria had left quietly, on medical leave. A postcard postmarked Miami hit my mailbox. "I'll be back." I pinned it beside the framed certificate affirming our water rights and smiled. On the day crews dismantled the illegal pipe and finished the compliant one, a new sign went up on the edge of the buffer zone, Samuel Harper Water Conservation Area. I read it aloud and felt something unclench. We'd kept the promise my grandfather bought in a drought, and my father defended it a folding table in a county hall. Here's the clear ending, with nothing left fuzzy. Sapphire Ridge HOA pays fair, measured fees for a resource they once tried to take. The pipeline is rebuilt to code and monitored in the open. The apology ran for 2 weeks in print, just like we required. The board learned to look me in the eye with respect instead of disdain, not because I beat them, but because we finally agreed that water in Cedar Glen Valley is not a toy for marketing. It's a trust. I still mend fences in boots and a sun-bleached jacket. At dusk, when the hills bruise and the wind slides cool over the grass, I can hear the quiet thrum of the pump house at the far corner. The same hum my grandfather heard when he first turned that wheel. It's the sound of a community, choosing stewardship over swagger, limits over illusion, and law over leverage. And for Harper Ranch, it's the sound of a legacy sealed tight.